Okay, ladies and gentlemen, been a while since we've had a virtual lesson. We're looking at chapter 8-5 here, and we're talking about using the distributive property to factor polynomials. And this is how we divide polynomials. We've done adding, subtracting, multiplying in various different situations, and now we're finally going to look at dividing. Now, what does the distributive property look like? Could you imagine what the opposite of the distributive property would be like? Because we all know that multiplication and division are opposites, okay? So think about going from this to this. Any guesses as to how we might get there? Well, one thing that you want to keep in mind is what we call the GCF, the greatest common factor. And we're looking for the greatest common factor of the terms. So what can I divide 12x by that I can also divide 4 by? Well, the greatest common factor is 4. So the 4 goes on the outside of the parentheses, and 12 divided by 4 is 3x, and 4 divided by 4 is 1. So you see how we can go backwards. Let's try an example. So I've got 15x plus 25x squared. What GCF can we come up with? What can I divide both pieces by? Well, we can see right out the bat, looking at the numbers, 15 and 25, I can divide both of those by 5. I also need to think about the x's. Both have an x, so I can divide them by 1x. So my GCF is 5x, and remember that's going to go on the outside of the parentheses. And then on the inside of the parentheses is how I simplify this. 15 divided by 5 is 3, and x divided by x is, so that part disappears. And then I've got my plus sign, and then 25 divided by 5 is 5, and x squared divided by x, remember to divide exponents, x squared divided by x, I'm going to subtract those exponents. So I'll do 2 minus 1 is 1, so x squared divided by x is x. Now I have factored using the distributive property. Try the second example, a little bit trickier here. What can you find as a GCF? What can I divide all three things by? Well, I'm thinking about the factors of 12. It's an even number, so I can divide them all by 2. Is there a biggest number? Because remember, I'm thinking about the greatest. I could divide them all by 3. I could have also divide by 6. And I believe that's going to be our biggest. So we're going to divide everything by 6. And then we need to look at our variables. They all have at least one x, so I can divide everything by x. And they all have at least one y, so I can divide everything by y. So again, the GCF goes on the outside, parentheses. I've got 12 divided by 6, which is 2. X divided by x cancels out. Y divided by y cancels out. Plus 24 divided by 6 is 4. X divided by x cancels out. Y squared divided by y is y. And the last one, 30 divided by 6 is 5. X squared divided by x to the first is x. Y to the fourth divided by y to the first is y cubed. And so I have factored by using the distributive property. Try this one on your own. The GCF is 3xy, and when we divide by 3xy, we get left with just an x, and 12 divided by 3 is 4, and the x's disappear and left with just a y. So your correct answer here is A. Try this one by yourself. The GCF here is 3ab squared. 3ab squared divided by 3ab squared is 1. 15 divided by 3 is 5. A squared divided by a is a. B squared divided by b squared disappears. 27 divided by 3 is 9. A divided by a disappears, and b cubed divided by b squared is just b. So your final answer is D. All right, now these get a little bit more complicated here. We can use the distributive property to factor this, but we need to group similar things together first. So in looking at this first problem here, if I group together the first two items and look for a common factor, I see a common factor of x. And I'm going to group the last two things together. And here, the only thing I see a common factor of is a negative. So let's get rid of that negative. Okay, so how do I write this out? The x goes on the outside of parentheses, and the x's disappear. So I'm left with 2y plus x's disappear, 7. The negative 1 goes on the outside of parentheses, that's my GCF, and on the inside I get 2y plus 7. Okay, now, does this look familiar to you guys? Think about when we do the claw method or FOIL. Okay, when I'm foiling, I take the first number and multiply it both things. That's what's happening here. Then I take the second number and I multiply it by both things. That's what's happening here. So to write my final answer, and the most important thing here, is that the numbers inside the parentheses are exactly the same. Once you get those numbers inside the parentheses exactly the same, you're going to smash together the factors into the first set of parentheses, and then the numbers that are inside the parentheses go here. Let's try another one. All right, so remember, you're going to group together the first two and the last two. You're looking for a common factor. In this case, I can divide by a 3a. And so I put the 3a on the outside. 15 divided by 3 is 5, and the a's cancel out. 3 divided by 3 is 1, and I'm left with a b. And then on this side, I can factor out a 4. And since it's a positive, I write plus 4. 4 divided by 4 disappears. That's 1b. Negative 20 divided by 4, negative 5. All right, so as we get to the end here, we see that we don't have the same number inside the parentheses. This is just a small problem, because what I notice is I have a positive 5 and a negative 5, a negative 1 and a positive 1. So what I'm going to do is, instead of dividing by a positive 4, I'm going to divide by a negative 4. And so I need to erase this plus sign. Whoops, that erased a lot. That becomes a negative 4. And then the 1b becomes a negative 1b, and the 5 becomes a positive 5. Now I do have the same thing, they're just flipped a little bit. Okay, so again, I'm going to smash together the two numbers that are on the outside into one set of parentheses and rewrite the other thing. And I'm going to write it in standard form as negative 1b, oops, I don't need the 1, negative b plus 5. All right, let's have you try one. Give it a pause, see if you can solve it yourself. All right, those are my greatest common factors that I'm going to divide by. And I get, crossing out, that gives me a positive y plus 5, and my greatest common factor on the outside, and a positive 3, the greatest common factor on the outside, gives me a y plus 5, Remember, we're going to smash together the two greatest common factors. And y plus 5. All right, so final answer would be B. All right, let's try some homework. 1 through 8 all. Good luck. The second half is where you're going to group them. The first half is where you're going to divide by the GCF to everything. Make sure you can see the difference so that when you get to a quiz or a test, you understand the difference.